They said it started with a single, searing moment, an explosion of anger that shattered the fragile calm of a suburban dusk. In a quiet neighborhood, where lawns were meticulously trimmed and the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the promise of safety, the air suddenly pulsed with tension. No one could have predicted that the very creature meant to bring joy and companionship, a scruffy, anxious sheltered dog, would become the harbinger of such terror. The dog, a medium-sized mutt with uneven patches of brindle and white, had been picked up from a run-down animal shelter known for its overcrowded kennels and desperate attempts at rehabilitation. Its eyes, dark and haunted, hinted at a past it could neither forget nor escape. When the Robinson family first welcomed the dog into their modest, two-story home on Maple Street, they did so with hope and compassion. But beneath that hope lay a conspiracy of silent signals and inexplicable events that would soon unravel the very fabric of their lives. From the outset, there was an unsettling energy about the animal. Mrs. Robinson, a gentle woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and a determined heart, had noticed the dog's twitching limbs and furtive glances as soon as it set paw inside the living room. Mr. Robinson, a practical man with a steady gaze and a knack for fixing things around the house, chalked it up to the trauma of its past life, a rough existence that had etched deep lines of distrust in the creature's soul. Their youngest, Lily, a curious 6-year-old with a boundless imagination and a tender vulnerability, found solace in the dog's presence, oblivious to the dark secret swirling beneath its ragged coat. In the early days, the Robinson home, filled with the comforting hum of everyday life, seemed a sanctuary for the lost canine. The living room, painted in soft hues of cream and pastel blue, became a stage for tentative interactions. The dog would lie in a corner, its gaze following Lily as she skipped about, playing with her dolls, the sound of her laughter echoing through the hallways. Yet, behind those gentle moments, there was a palpable undercurrent of disquiet that none of them fully understood. On one particularly cool autumn evening, as twilight draped the neighborhood in a muted palette of blues and grays, the subtle shift occurred. Lily had been playing near the back door, a modest portal leading to a small, overgrown garden that the family seldom visited. The dog, usually subdued and withdrawn, suddenly sprang to attention, its ears perked as though it sensed something unseen. In that instant, an inexplicable tension fell over the scene. The dog's eyes flashed with an intensity that bordered on madness, and its body tensed as if preparing for an unseen threat. Without warning, a low, guttural growl erupted from the creature, slicing through the comfortable silence of the evening like a jagged shard of glass. In the blink of an eye, it lunged towards Lily, its movements erratic and frenzied. Time seemed to slow as the family watched in horror, the dog's teeth bared, its snarl contorted by something deep within. The joyous laughter that had defined the earlier moments was replaced by screams and frantic cries as chaos took hold. Within that heart-stopping moment, the seeds of a mystery began to sprout. Neighbors later recounted how, moments before the attack, a series of small, unexplainable events had rippled through the quiet street, a flickering street lamp, the sudden hum of an out-of-place car engine, and, most disturbingly, whispers of a presence that had nothing to do with the mundane rhythms of suburban life. The Robinsons were left grappling with a surreal realization: this was not a simple case of a dog reacting to fear or confusion. Something far more sinister was at work. In the days that followed, the family struggled to reconcile their love for the animal with the horrifying incident that had upended their lives. Mr. Robinson, determined to understand the sudden, violent shift, began to retrace the dog's steps back to the shelter. The shelter itself was a stark, grim building on the edge of town, its faded walls and broken windows speaking volumes about neglect and despair. Here, the dog had spent its formative months, its history a patchwork of abuse, abandonment, and whispered rumors of darker experiments conducted behind locked doors. As Mr. Robinson delved deeper into the records, he discovered hints of a covert investigation, one that seemed to implicate the shelter in a series of mysterious behavioral anomalies among its animals. Meanwhile, Mrs. Robinson found herself haunted by disjointed fragments of memories. In the stillness of night, as she lay in bed listening to the gentle creak of the old house settling, she could almost hear the echo of whispered threats and unspoken secrets. Every creak and rustle became a reminder that something was amiss, an undercurrent of danger that she could neither define nor dismiss. The once safe haven of her home now felt like a stage set for an unfolding tragedy, where every shadow might hide a hidden menace. Lily, though physically unharmed in the aftermath of the attack, carried an invisible scar. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a lingering wariness that belied her tender age. Her drawings, once bursting with the vibrant hues of childhood, now featured stark, unsettling images, a distorted canine figure lurking in the corners of her sketches, a silent sentinel with eyes too aware for a creature meant to be gentle. The family's attempts to reassure her were met with vague, troubled explanations that only deepened the mystery. As days turned into weeks, the quiet suburb transformed into a chessboard of suspicion and unease. The Robinsons began to notice subtle changes in their environment, a neighbor's hushed conversation as they passed on the street, inexplicable gaps in the routine of their daily life, and a pervasive sense that someone, or something, was orchestrating events from behind a veil of normalcy. In the midst of this disquiet, the dog remained an enigma. Its behavior oscillated between moments of gentle affection and sudden, violent outbursts that defied simple explanation. The family's veterinarian, a pragmatic soul with decades of experience, could offer no concrete diagnosis. The dog's condition was an anomaly, a puzzle that defied the usual categorizations of trauma or neglect. One rainy afternoon, with the sky a murky canvas of swirling grays, Mr. Robinson found himself drawn to the park, a small, neglected green space at the heart of the neighborhood. It was there, amidst the rustling of dry leaves and the rhythmic patter of rain on pavement, that he encountered a figure who seemed to be waiting for him. The stranger, an older man with eyes that held both sorrow and secrets, spoke in a measured tone that resonated with the weight of shared knowledge. "I know what you're going through," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, as though each word had been carved from stone. "This dog, it isn't what it seems." His words, simple yet laden with implication, sent a shiver down Mr. Robinson's spine. The stranger revealed that he had once worked at the shelter, and that there were whispers of a covert experiment, a shadowy project aimed not at curing behavioral issues, but at harnessing the latent aggression in animals for purposes that defied ethical boundaries. According to him, the experiments had been abruptly halted, but not before leaving indelible marks on the animals involved. The dog, he hinted, was one of those unfortunate subjects. As Mr. Robinson absorbed this information, a cascade of questions flooded his mind. Had the shelter's dark past somehow bled into his own home? Was the attack on Lily merely a random act of violence, or was it the calculated execution of a malevolent plan? The man's cryptic words, delivered with the precision of someone who had seen too much, left Mr. Robinson with a deep sense of foreboding. The park, with its wet benches and silent trees, transformed into a setting of eerie significance, a silent witness to the collision of mundane life and hidden terror. Back at the Robinson residence, tension had settled like a heavy fog. The once familiar sounds of laughter and conversation were now punctuated by strained silences and furtive glances. Every creak of the floorboard, every murmur in the dark, served as a reminder that the boundary between safety and danger had been irrevocably blurred. The dog, now a permanent fixture of the household, roamed the rooms with an unsettling air of detachment. It was as if it carried within it the weight of secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. In quiet moments, when the family gathered in the living room under the soft glow of a table lamp, subtle conflicts bubbled beneath the surface. Mrs. Robinson's eyes would occasionally meet her husband's in silent, desperate communication, a shared acknowledgement of the unknown threat lurking in the periphery of their lives. Even Lily, with her childlike innocence, seemed to sense the shift. She would sometimes pause in her play, her gaze drifting toward the darkened hallway where the dog lingered, as though expecting it to spring into motion at any moment. Yet, amidst the mounting dread, there were also flickers of normalcy, fragments of life that insisted on persisting despite the shadow of fear. The family continued with their daily routines, grocery shopping at the local market, quiet dinners around a wooden table that had seen generations come and go, and leisurely strolls through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. But every seemingly ordinary moment was underscored by an ever-present sense of danger, a visceral awareness that the world they thought they knew was interlaced with threads of deceit and hidden malice. In one particularly charged moment, as dusk gave way to night, Mr. Robinson found himself pacing the narrow corridors of the house. The old wood of the floorboards creaked under his measured steps, each sound echoing like a countdown to an impending revelation. His thoughts were a chaotic tapestry of unanswered questions and desperate hypotheses. What had truly brought the dog into their lives? Had its violent outburst been a random aberration, or was it the final act of a long-laid trap? Outside, the wind picked up, its howling whispers intertwining with the rustle of leaves. The temperature dropped sharply, and the once comforting darkness of night now appeared as a cloak concealing unspeakable truths. Mr. Robinson's mind drifted back to the cryptic encounter in the park, the stranger's grave words that painted the shelter as a breeding ground for human malice disguised in canine form. The idea was both absurd and horrifying, that a series of deliberate experiments could have transformed a gentle animal into a living weapon, its aggression engineered to target the most vulnerable member of a family. The memory of that day, a day marred by both hope and horror, loomed large in his mind. It was the day when Lily, in a moment of innocent trust, had reached out to pet the dog, only to be met with a violent reaction that shattered the fragile illusion of safety. In that split second, the dog's behavior had swung from tentative and cautious to ferociously unpredictable. The incident had not only traumatized Lily, but it had also seeded a deep mistrust within the family, a sense that their lives were no longer governed by the natural order of compassion and care. As the night deepened, Mr. Robinson's restless thoughts led him to the small study where he kept a worn leather journal, a repository of his private reflections. He began scribbling down details of the day, desperate to capture every nuance before it slipped away into the recesses of memory. The journal entries became a mosaic of raw emotion and sharp observation, the trembling in his wife's hands as she recounted the attack, the furtive glances exchanged between neighbors, and the unsettling calm in the dog's eyes that belied the chaos it had unleashed. In the muted light of the study, every word on the page felt like an attempt to impose order on a situation that was spiraling into madness. The lines between fact and conjecture blurred as Mr. Robinson delved deeper into the dog's history, examining every scrap of information he could glean from the shelter records, the cryptic testimony of the stranger at the park, and the subtle, almost imperceptible signs that something malevolent had been at play long before the dog had crossed the threshold of their home. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to break through the veil of night, casting long, slanting shadows across the quiet streets of Maple Street. The neighborhood, still wrapped in the lingering remnants of the previous night's fear, stirred with a tentative hope for a new beginning. But for the Robinsons, every ray of light was a reminder that the darkness they had witnessed was far from vanquished. It lurked in the corners of every room, in the silent spaces between heartbeats, waiting for the moment when it would once again emerge from the shadows. As morning unfurled, the family convened in a breakfast ritual that was both familiar and strained. The clink of cutlery, the soft murmur of conversation, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee attempted to mask the undercurrent of anxiety that permeated the air. Lily, sitting at the table with a doll clutched to her chest, stared vacantly at the patterned tablecloth as if searching for answers in its design. Her parents exchanged glances heavy with unspoken worry, each acutely aware that the tranquility of this morning was a fragile illusion, a prelude to the inevitable storm that threatened to consume them all. Even as they tried to anchor themselves in the routine of everyday life, the incident cast a long shadow over every moment. The dog, now a constant presence in the background, moved with a detached grace that was both eerie and unnerving. Its eyes, often fixed on some unseen point, seemed to carry the weight of a dark secret, a secret that bound its fate inexorably to that of the Robinson family. In every subtle gesture, in every measured breath, there was a sense of forewarning that the violence of the past was not a closed chapter, but an ongoing narrative that would continue to unfold in unexpected and devastating ways. And so, as the day progressed with an unsettling normalcy, the threads of the past and the promise of an uncertain future wove themselves into a tapestry of quiet dread and relentless inquiry. The dog's presence, once a symbol of hope and redemption, had become a living enigma, a creature whose violent outburst was merely the visible tip of an iceberg of hidden machinations and deliberate cruelty. With each passing hour, the Robinsons edged closer to the realization that the attack was not a random accident, but the calculated move of a plot whose origins were as murky as the fading shadows of the night. In the stillness of that morning, as the sun began to assert its dominance over the dim remnants of night, the Robinson family stood at the precipice of an unraveling mystery, a mystery that would force them to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, vulnerability, and the limits of human control. The days ahead promised no easy answers, only a deepening descent into the labyrinth of a conspiracy that had chosen their home as its stage and Lily, their most precious treasure, as its unwitting target. Every heartbeat echoed with the memory of that violent moment, and every whisper of wind through the trees carried with it the silent threat of another strike. The suburban calm, so meticulously crafted by years of routine and careful living, had been irrevocably shattered. In its place loomed an uncertain future, where every shadow could hide a secret and every familiar face might conceal an ulterior motive. The stage was set, and the first act of a drama steeped in betrayal and hidden agendas had already been played out, a drama that would challenge everything the Robinsons once held dear. In that charged atmosphere of lingering fear and reluctant acceptance, the family began to navigate the delicate balance between denial and the stark reality of their situation. They clung to the remnants of normalcy, shared meals, small smiles, and the quiet hope that with time, the wounds might heal. Yet, deep within the confines of their hearts, the question lingered: was this all simply an unfortunate twist of fate, or was there a darker hand orchestrating every twist and turn? As the morning gave way to an afternoon of tentative routines and half-spoken reassurances, the truth lay hidden like a dormant ember, waiting for the slightest provocation to ignite once more. The dog, with its inscrutable gaze and unpredictable mannerisms, continued to roam the halls of the home, a constant reminder of the mystery that had invaded their lives. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of fabric, resonated with the silent promise that the next moment could bring with it revelations too shocking to imagine. In the heart of that day, as the Robinsons went about their tasks with an air of forced normality, the seeds of suspicion began to sprout among the seemingly benign details of their lives. A misplaced toy here, an inexplicable stain there, each anomaly was a thread in the tapestry of events that bound them to a fate they could neither foresee nor escape. The delicate interplay between hope and dread, between the mundane and the macabre, had woven itself into the very essence of their existence, creating a tapestry of life that was as beautiful as it was brutally unpredictable. And so, in the quiet moments between laughter and lingering silence, the story of a sheltered dog, a shattered family, and a conspiracy born in the shadows of neglect had begun its relentless march towards an uncertain future. The day stretched on, a canvas of fleeting moments and unspoken truths, each second laden with the promise of revelation and the threat of another unexpected, violent outburst. It was a beginning marked by the sharp contrast of light and darkness, a moment when the familiar turned treacherous, and every heartbeat carried the weight of a secret too dangerous to be exposed. The Robinsons, caught in the crossfire of fate and the unseen forces that had manipulated their lives, found themselves teetering on the edge of a truth that was as elusive as it was terrifying. The dog, once a symbol of rescue and second chances, had become the unwitting messenger of a plot that reached far beyond the confines of their quiet suburban street, a plot that would challenge their understanding of loyalty, love, and the very nature of trust. With every passing moment, the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, leaving them to wonder if the real threat lay not in the animal's violent outburst, but in the insidious forces that had driven it to such extremes. In that charged silence, as the day continued its slow, relentless progression toward the uncertain promise of evening, every detail of the Robinsons' life took on a new, disconcerting significance. The gentle murmur of a neighbor's greeting, the soft hum of a passing car, even the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall, all became part of a symphony of subtle warnings, each note a harbinger of the storm that was gathering on the horizon. The boundaries of their once innocent existence had been irrevocably redrawn, and the family was now thrust into a reality where every moment was tinged with the possibility of yet another act of violence, another betrayal, another unspeakable secret waiting to emerge from the darkness. In that first, fateful chapter of their new life, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the world around them shifted between the calm of fading light and the encroaching chill of night, the Robinsons began a journey that would test the very limits of their resilience. The sheltered dog, with its tormented eyes and unpredictable behavior, had not only changed their lives, but had also become the key to unlocking a mystery that threatened to expose the darkest corners of human intent. In the interplay of mundane routines and sudden, inexplicable terror, the seeds of a conspiracy had been sown, one that would continue to unfurl its tendrils into every facet of their existence, until the true nature of the attack, and the forces behind it, were finally revealed. Each moment was a fragile balance between what was seen and what lay hidden beneath the surface, a balance that the Robinsons would soon learn was as precarious as the promise of a new dawn, and as dangerous as the secrets locked away in the silent eyes of the dog they had once believed could bring healing and hope. The uneasy tranquility of the Robinson household was shattered that very night when Mr. Robinson, unable to sleep under the oppressive weight of his thoughts, stepped out into the chill of the early hours. The darkness was dense, broken only by the occasional flicker of a street lamp and the soft, intermittent patter of rain that began to fall like whispered confessions from the sky. In the solitude of the night, his mind churned with unanswered questions and an insatiable need for truth. He recalled the stranger's somber warning at the park and the cryptic murmurings of a hidden conspiracy, a reminder that every familiar corner of his once peaceful neighborhood might conceal a sinister secret. Driven by a restless determination, Mr. Robinson made his way back to the shelter, a decrepit building at the outskirts of town, its facade a testament to decades of neglect and sorrow. The shelter had always been a place of hushed despair, a repository for lost souls both human and animal. Now, it loomed as a specter of the past, its broken windows and peeling paint whispering of horrors that were never meant to be uncovered. The rain slicked his steps as he approached the entrance, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. Inside, the atmosphere was stifling, the air thick with the residue of old trauma and half-forgotten regrets. The silence was almost palpable as he wandered through narrow corridors lined with faded photographs and scattered remnants of care, tattered blankets, chipped bowls, and forms stained with the ink of bureaucratic indifference. Every step resonated with echoes of the lives that had passed through these halls, each one marked by a quiet desperation. His search was not just for answers about the dog, but for a glimpse into the hidden forces that had orchestrated its transformation from a vulnerable stray to a creature capable of such inexplicable violence. In a cramped office, Mr. Robinson discovered a filing cabinet that creaked under the strain of neglect. As he rifled through yellowed records, the weight of the past bore down on him. There were detailed reports of behavioral evaluations, entries that hinted at experiments sanctioned by anonymous benefactors, and memos that spoke of adjustments made to temperaments and instincts. The language was clinical yet disturbing, phrases like aggression modulation, stimulus-triggered responses, and selective targeting leapt off the pages. Each document painted a picture of a system that had exploited the animals for purposes that transcended simple rehabilitation. It was as if the shelter had become an unwilling participant in a larger, more nefarious plan, a plan that had ensnared the very creature that now haunted the Robinsons' home. As the hours slipped by, Mr. Robinson felt the grip of despair tighten around him. His thoughts swirled like the eddies of the rainwater pooling on the cracked concrete outside. He made mental notes and snapped photos of every damning piece of evidence with his phone, each click a testament to his commitment to uncovering the truth. There was no easy way back from what he had found. The records hinted at a long history of human interference, experiments cloaked in secrecy, and the deliberate manipulation of nature for purposes that defied ethical reasoning. Outside the shelter, the rain had transformed into a relentless downpour, the world outside a blur of watery hues and distorted reflections. Mr. Robinson stood for a moment in the storm, letting the cold water wash away his hesitation. In that cleansing rush, his resolve solidified. He would confront the forces behind these dark experiments, even if it meant exposing a truth that might irrevocably alter the lives of his family. The dog, with its haunted eyes and unpredictable outbursts, was merely the latest victim of a system that viewed living beings as disposable tools in a larger, unholy experiment. Back at home, the rest of the Robinson family grappled with their own silent demons. Mrs. Robinson sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared tea, the familiar clink of porcelain now a cruel reminder of what had transpired. Lily, still visibly shaken by the day's events, clung to a faded stuffed animal as she stared out the window, her wide eyes reflecting the chaos of emotions that she could neither name nor understand. The once warm and inviting rooms of the house had transformed into arenas of unspoken fear, where every sound, a creak, a sigh, even the soft hum of the refrigerator, seemed imbued with the potential for danger. That afternoon, as clouds gathered ominously over the quiet street, a knock at the door broke the silence. It was a man in a worn jacket, his face lined with the marks of hardship and regret. He introduced himself simply as Arthur, a former employee of the shelter, his voice a low murmur that conveyed both caution and sorrow. Over tea that was more bitter than sweet, Arthur recounted his experiences at the shelter. He spoke of clandestine meetings held in darkened back rooms, of influential figures whose identities were hidden behind layers of corporate and governmental red tape, and of experiments that sought to harness aggression for profit or power. His words, spoken in a measured tone, painted a portrait of a network of individuals who had forsaken compassion in favor of control. Arthur's eyes darted about as he spoke, as if haunted by memories of what he had witnessed, memories that were as painful as they were revealing. In his somber narrative, Arthur explained that the dog had been one of many animals subjected to these experiments, its behavior subtly altered by chemical agents and psychological conditioning. The aggression it displayed was not an innate flaw, but a reaction engineered by those who sought to create the perfect weapon, a creature that could be activated with a mere trigger, its loyalty twisted into something far more dangerous than mere survival instinct. Arthur's account, corroborated by the damning documents Mr. Robinson had uncovered, left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. The revelation that a system so callous could weaponize innocence was not only horrifying but deeply personal, resonating with every parent's fear of a world where the very beings meant to protect and nurture could be perverted into agents of harm. In the days that followed, the Robinsons found themselves locked in a silent battle against both external and internal forces. The once comforting routines of family life were punctuated by furtive glances and whispered conversations. Mrs. Robinson, whose gentle demeanor had long been a pillar of strength, now seemed fragile, as though the weight of the truth might shatter her delicate resolve at any moment. Lily's drawings, which had once been full of whimsy and color, began to darken with recurring motifs of confinement and chaos, a small, trembling figure in the midst of an abstract storm, a silent plea for help embedded in every stroke. Yet amidst the creeping dread, a spark of determination began to take root in Mr. Robinson's heart. He realized that the key to protecting his family lay in exposing the hidden network behind the shelter's operations. With Arthur's reluctant assistance, he set about piecing together the fragmented narrative of the experiments. They spent long hours poring over records, cross-referencing dates and names, and identifying patterns that suggested a deliberate, calculated scheme. Every new detail that emerged was like a drop of ink staining an already murky pool of water, each revelation deepening the mystery while simultaneously sharpening the focus on those responsible. As the investigation deepened, the boundaries between the four familiar locations began to blur. The cozy, albeit troubled, sanctuary of the Robinson home became a secondary stage to the stark, oppressive reality of the shelter's dark history. The park, once a benign backdrop for community life, now carried echoes of clandestine meetings and whispered warnings. Even the small study, with its comforting clutter of books and journals, had transformed into a war room where every scrap of evidence was scrutinized with a feverish intensity. In these overlapping spaces, the everyday and the extraordinary collided, forging a new reality where the ordinary comforts of home were inextricably linked to a vast, shadowy conspiracy. One drizzly evening, while the family sat together in the living room trying to recapture a semblance of normalcy, a knock at the door startled them. It was a young journalist from a local paper, eyes bright with a mix of ambition and genuine concern. He had heard whispers of strange occurrences at the shelter and was determined to uncover the truth behind the mysterious aggression in the neighborhood. His arrival injected the household with a mix of hope and trepidation, hope that the public exposure might force those in power to answer for their actions, and trepidation that the ensuing publicity could further endanger Lily and the rest of the family. The journalist, whose name was Daniel, began interviewing the Robinsons, his questions pointed and unyielding as he sought to unravel the layers of deceit. He listened intently as Mr. Robinson recounted his discoveries, his voice steady despite the underlying tremor of fear and frustration. Daniel's probing inquiries brought to light not only the factual details of the experiments but also the raw emotional toll they had taken on the family. His recorder captured every whispered admission, every tentative confession of sleepless nights and harrowing memories. The process, though intrusive in its own right, offered the Robinsons a chance to reclaim their narrative, to transform their horror into a clarion call for justice. Meanwhile, the dog continued to be both a source of comfort and a constant reminder of the sinister forces at work. Its behavior remained erratic, oscillating between moments of almost tender affection and sudden, inexplicable bursts of aggression that sent shockwaves through the household. In quiet moments, as Mrs. Robinson attempted to soothe Lily with gentle strokes and whispered reassurances, the animal's dark eyes would meet hers with an intensity that seemed to speak of a life burdened by secrets too heavy for any creature to bear. The animal was a living paradox, a symbol of both the hope of rescue and the terrifying reality of human manipulation. Every glance it cast, every twitch of its ears, carried with it the weight of a story that had yet to be fully told, a story of exploitation, betrayal, and the shattering of innocence. As the investigation pressed on, the lines between victim and aggressor became increasingly blurred. The evidence suggested that the dog's violent outburst had not been a spontaneous act of instinctual fear, but rather a reaction conditioned by forces far beyond its control. In the dim light of the study, as Mr. Robinson and Daniel reviewed countless documents and photographs, the realization dawned upon them that the experiment had not ended with one dog, it had been part of a broader, ongoing initiative. The implications were staggering. If such experiments were being carried out on animals, what other corners of society might be under the influence of these shadowy operatives? The very notion sent ripples of paranoia through the community, a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of everyday life, darker currents were at play. In the midst of this maelstrom of revelations, Lily's world continued to shift. Her once vibrant, carefree laughter had given way to a hesitant quiet, and her eyes, those clear, inquisitive eyes, now harbored a cautious wariness. In the soft glow of her bedroom lamp, she would often sit at her small desk, sketching scenes that were both haunting and inexplicably beautiful. There were drawings of a dog with eyes that seemed to hold the sorrow of ages, of a shadowy figure lurking in the periphery of a dimly lit room, and of a fragile child standing at the threshold of an uncertain future. Each image was a silent testament to the internal struggles of a mind trying to process a reality that defied explanation. Her art, raw and unfiltered, spoke of both terror and hope, a duality that encapsulated the very essence of the unfolding tragedy. Over the following weeks, as the autumn leaves continued to fall and the chill in the air deepened, the investigation gathered momentum. Mr. Robinson, now driven by a fierce determination to protect his family and expose the corruption lurking behind the shelter's facade, reached out to local authorities. Yet, his warnings were met with bureaucratic indifference and veiled threats that hinted at forces too powerful to challenge openly. The more he dug, the more he realized that the tendrils of the conspiracy reached far beyond a single dilapidated shelter or even the quiet streets of his neighborhood. It was a network built on secrecy and the subversion of trust, a network that had, in its cold efficiency, sacrificed countless lives on the altar of ambition. In one particularly harrowing encounter, Mr. Robinson found himself cornered in a narrow alley behind the shelter, where a shadowy figure emerged from the gloom. The encounter was brief but searing, a whispered warning, a gloved hand brushing against his shoulder, and then the figure melted back into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. The brush with danger underscored the perilous nature of his quest for truth, a quest that was as much about protecting his family as it was about exposing a system that thrived on cruelty and manipulation. Back home, as the days merged into a relentless continuum of anxiety and determination, the family began to forge their own small sanctuary of resistance. In whispered conversations late into the night, they mapped out ways to safeguard Lily, to reclaim their home from the encroaching dread. Mrs. Robinson, once known for her quiet resilience, now radiated a steely determination, a resolve that belied the tenderness of her features. Every mundane task, from locking doors to double-checking windows, became an act of defiance against a world that had shown them how fragile safety could be. Throughout all of this, the omnipresent presence of the dog served as both a reminder and a catalyst. Its every action, whether the soft nudge of its head against a trembling hand or the sudden, startling snap of its jaws, echoed the underlying truth that nothing was as it seemed. The animal's gaze, deep and penetrating, held secrets that no human could fully comprehend. And in its silent companionship, the Robinsons found an unsettling mirror to their own fears and hopes, a living testament to the capacity for both vulnerability and resilience in the face of inexplicable terror. In the charged moments of dusk and dawn, as the family gathered around the dinner table in a fragile truce with the day's events, there remained an unspoken understanding that their lives had been irrevocably altered. The quiet clink of cutlery, the soft murmur of shared confidences, and the distant rumble of thunder all bore witness to a reality where every moment teetered on the edge of chaos. And so, in that twilight between certainty and doubt, the Robinsons braced themselves for the next chapter, a chapter that promised to reveal even darker layers of the conspiracy, to test the bonds of family and the strength of their collective will. Every heartbeat echoed with the memory of that violent outburst, every fleeting shadow seemed to conceal another secret waiting to be unearthed. The investigation was no longer merely about understanding the origins of the dog's aggression, it had become a quest to reclaim control over a life that had been hijacked by unseen forces. In the interplay of stark realities and the unyielding pursuit of truth, the Robinsons found themselves on a collision course with destiny, a destiny that was as unpredictable as it was inevitable, and one that would force them to confront the darkest recesses of human intent, even if it meant laying bare the secrets that had long festered in the silence of neglected corridors. And so, as the rain continued to fall in relentless sheets and the world outside seemed to dissolve into a blur of watery reflections and trembling lights, the Robinson family carried on. Their home, once a symbol of warmth and comfort, had transformed into a crucible of resolve, a place where every whispered secret and every uncovered document fueled a growing determination to expose the truth. In the quiet moments that stretched between night and day, as the family huddled together against the encroaching storm, a silent vow took shape, a vow to stand together, to unmask the hidden architects of their misery, and to reclaim the life that had been so callously tampered with. Thus, in the somber cadence of a world unmoored from its certainties, the investigation marched forward, propelled by the unyielding spirit of a man who had seen too much to turn away, by a mother whose quiet strength now burned with the fire of defiance, and by a child whose innocent eyes had witnessed a horror that would forever alter the fabric of her dreams. In this relentless pursuit of truth, every moment was a battle against the darkness, a battle that would demand sacrifice, courage, and the unwavering belief that even in the deepest shadows, the light of truth could eventually prevail. Under the relentless pressure of the unfolding mystery, the next days bled into one another, each one steeped in an ever-deepening tension that rendered the boundaries between safety and peril nearly indistinguishable. Early one mist-shrouded morning, as the first hesitant rays of sunlight fought their way through a canopy of persistent clouds, Mr. Robinson awoke to a heavy silence that seemed to press against the windows of the house. In the dim light of the kitchen, where the remnants of last night's storm still lingered in the form of damp towels and streaked glass, he pored over the photographs and notes he had taken at the shelter. The images were stark and unyielding, a visual record of a past riddled with neglect and exploitation. Each document he reviewed deepened his conviction: the experiments were not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic abuse that had left scars on every animal that had passed through those grim corridors. Determined to confront the source of this dark legacy, Mr. Robinson convened a discreet meeting with Arthur and Daniel. They gathered in a small study, a cramped space cluttered with old newspapers, dog-eared books on animal behavior, and scattered notes that testified to many sleepless nights. The low hum of a battered ceiling fan punctuated their hushed conversation as they laid out a plan to expose those behind the clandestine project. Arthur's voice, roughened by regret and the weight of past transgressions, recounted more details of his time at the shelter. He described a hidden basement room behind a false wall, a place where records were destroyed and subjects were subjected to invasive treatments. His words, measured and pained, painted a picture of a covert operation run by shadowy figures with a disturbing disregard for life. Daniel, whose investigative instincts had driven him to follow up on every cryptic lead, revealed that he had managed to secure a confidential tip from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to have once been a technician involved in the experiments. The tip suggested that the manipulation of animal behavior was only the tip of an iceberg. Behind the scenes, there were whispered discussions about applications that extended beyond controlling aggression. Rumors spoke of a covert initiative aimed at testing methods of psychological control on the most vulnerable segments of society, a project that, if true, would implicate a network of influential individuals across various sectors of power. Outside, the rain had finally ceased, leaving the neighborhood washed in a fragile clarity that belied the undercurrent of dread. The once familiar streets now took on an altered appearance in the post-storm light. The freshly cleaned pavement shimmered under the emerging sun, and the trees, their leaves still heavy with droplets, swayed slowly as if reluctant to divulge any secrets. Yet, amid this deceptive serenity, an unsettling energy lingered, a palpable awareness that something was lurking just out of sight, watching and waiting. As the day unfolded, the investigation took a more dangerous turn. Mr. Robinson found himself returning to the shelter under the guise of retrieving more documents that he believed had been inadvertently left behind. The building, which he had earlier scoured with furtive determination, now appeared even more menacing. Its narrow hallways were dimly lit, and every creak of the floorboards under his cautious steps reverberated like a forewarning. In one forgotten storage room, he discovered a dusty ledger, its pages filled with names, dates, and cryptic annotations. Among the names were not only those of the animals that had passed through the shelter, but also those of personnel, sponsors, and even local officials. The ledger hinted at a disturbing web of connections, a network that extended well beyond the confines of the dilapidated building. The discovery of the ledger set off a chain reaction within the household. When Mr. Robinson returned home with his clandestine find, he found that his family's expressions had hardened with a mixture of resolve and fear. Mrs. Robinson's previously tender eyes now held a steely glimmer. Even little Lily, whose innocence had been marred by recent events, seemed to sense that a battle was unfolding, one that threatened to erode the fragile fabric of their safe haven. In the quiet of the living room, as soft afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains, the family exchanged determined glances. There was an unspoken agreement that the next steps had to be taken carefully and decisively. With the ledger as their guiding document, the trio began mapping out the connections. Late into the night, huddled around a battered table strewn with photographs, handwritten notes, and hastily scribbled diagrams, they pieced together what looked like a puzzle of betrayal and manipulation. Each name, each date, resonated like a clue in a labyrinthine mystery, a map that hinted at collusion between people whose polished public faces concealed sinister private lives. In a corner of the study, illuminated only by the soft glow of a desk lamp, Arthur traced his finger along a particularly damning line of entries that connected the shelter to a seemingly innocuous local research institution. His voice was barely audible, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile alliance of trust that had formed between them. Across town, in a quiet office bathed in the sterile light of fluorescent bulbs, an unknown figure monitored their progress. The room was sparsely furnished, its walls lined with monitors displaying streams of data, news feeds, and surveillance footage from various corners of the city. The figure, whose face remained obscured by shadows, paused at the ledger's details that had now been uploaded into a secure file. With a few deliberate keystrokes, they set in motion a series of countermeasures designed to hinder the Robinsons' investigation. It was a silent war, a battle fought in the hidden recesses of bureaucracy and technological control, where every piece of evidence unearthed by the family was countered by an unseen hand determined to maintain the status quo. Unaware of the growing digital resistance, the Robinsons pressed on. Over the following days, Daniel's inquiries into local archives and public records yielded fragments of information that lent credence to their worst fears. In municipal meeting minutes, there were references to unexplained behavioral patterns in animals and a vague acknowledgement of funding allocated for special research projects. These mentions were cloaked in bureaucratic euphemisms, but when read alongside the damning ledger entries, they painted a damning portrait of institutional complicity. The family's investigation had evolved from a quest for personal understanding into a public mission, one that could expose a network of influence and corruption extending far beyond their quiet neighborhood. Amidst the mounting evidence, tensions within the community began to rise. Neighbors, once reticent to share even idle gossip, started whispering about strange figures seen at odd hours, unusual vehicles parked near the shelter, and even inexplicable occurrences such as lights flickering in supposedly abandoned warehouses. The local police, caught between the need to investigate and the murmurings of powerful interests, offered only perfunctory assurances that everything was under control. But for those who had witnessed the inexplicable behavior of the shelter dog and the uncanny events that followed in its wake, the reassurances rang hollow. In the Robinson household, the palpable strain manifested in every interaction. Mrs. Robinson, now both a comforting presence and a bastion of quiet determination, took to keeping a meticulous journal. Every detail, the sound of the wind against the window, the soft murmur of voices during hushed phone calls, the subtle shifts in the dog's behavior, was recorded with a precision born of necessity. The journal became both a record of the unfolding nightmare and a talisman against the pervasive fear that threatened to seep into every corner of their lives. Meanwhile, Lily's resilience was tested as never before. Her once carefree world, filled with bright colors and playful laughter, had dimmed into a landscape of muted tones and cautious steps. Yet even in her guarded demeanor, there were sparks of defiant hope. In the quiet moments before sleep, she would trace pictures in her mind, the happy home untainted by secrets, a dog that was gentle and true, and a future where fear was replaced by trust. Her drawings, now carefully hidden in a small box under her bed, captured these fleeting visions with a raw, unfiltered quality that belied her tender years. As dusk fell on another long day of revelations and quiet confrontations, the family gathered once more in the living room. Outside, the wind whispered through bare branches, carrying with it the chill of an approaching winter and the subtle promise of further upheaval. The dog lay near the hearth, its eyes half-closed yet alert to every sound, as though it too was caught in the web of secrets and half-truths that now defined the Robinsons' existence. In that fragile twilight, as the family exchanged guarded smiles and weary looks, an unspoken question hung in the air: how deep did the rabbit hole go, and how far were they willing, or able, to go to uncover the truth? In the following days, the investigation began to reveal not only the breadth of the conspiracy but also its brutal cost. The ledger's details led them to forgotten contracts, clandestine meetings, and even coded messages that hinted at an ongoing experiment. Each new piece of evidence was like a shard of broken glass, a fragment that cut sharply into the heart of the narrative they had assumed was simply about a troubled shelter dog. Instead, it became a chronicle of manipulation and abuse, a chronicle that linked the suffering of innocent creatures to the calculated ambitions of those who lurked in the shadows of power. With every revelation, the stakes grew higher. The one simple act of exposing corruption became a perilous journey, fraught with risks that threatened not only the physical safety of the Robinsons but also the fragile bonds that held their family together. There were nights when the silence of the house was shattered by the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside the driveway, a stark reminder that someone, somewhere, was watching their every move. The oppressive sensation of being pursued, of having no safe refuge, gnawed at them relentlessly. Yet, even as fear clawed at the edges of their daily routines, a defiant spirit took root. Mr. Robinson, galvanized by the weight of the evidence and the determination of his family, resolved to press on regardless of the mounting dangers. He began reaching out to a small group of trusted individuals, former colleagues, concerned activists, and even a sympathetic local council member who might help amplify their findings. Their clandestine meetings, held in nondescript cafes and quiet backrooms of community centers, were charged with a sense of urgency. In these gatherings, the seemingly disparate threads of the investigation were woven together into a coherent narrative that exposed the chilling extent of the experiments and the human collusion behind them. One evening, as a heavy fog rolled in from the harbor and blanketed the city in a ghostly pallor, Mr. Robinson received an encrypted email that promised to shed new light on the mysterious project. The sender, identifying themselves only by a pseudonym and accompanied by a series of cryptic digital signatures, claimed to have been involved in the research and expressed deep remorse over the unethical practices that had been carried out. The email contained a series of scanned documents and audio recordings, a damning dossier that not only confirmed the connection between the shelter and a larger, more insidious operation but also implicated several high-ranking officials and private contractors. The contents of the email were enough to send shivers down the spines of even the most hardened investigators. With trembling hands, Mr. Robinson and Daniel listened to the fragmented recordings, each word a jarring indictment of a system that had traded empathy for efficiency and human decency for profit. As the evidence mounted, a palpable sense of isolation set in among those who dared to challenge the status quo. The local media, though intrigued by the emerging story, were met with a series of legal threats and abrupt silences from sources once eager to talk. The community, once vibrant and unified, now found itself fractured by whispers of betrayal and mistrust. Even the once friendly faces on the street began to look away, their smiles forced and their eyes clouded with uncertainty. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected, a barrier between truth and the comfortable lies that people clung to in order to sleep at night. Amidst this maelstrom of discovery and dread, the Robinson family faced their most personal test. In a moment of quiet desperation, Mrs. Robinson sat by the window, staring out at the dimming horizon. The night had already fallen, and the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows that danced on the pavement like silent ghosts. Her mind churned with thoughts of what they had uncovered and what might still be hidden in the depths of a conspiracy too vast to comprehend. Yet even in the midst of that uncertainty, a stubborn ember of hope remained, a belief that truth, however elusive and dangerous, would eventually triumph over the oppressive darkness. In those long hours of solitude and reflection, the family rediscovered the strength that had first drawn them together. Lily, timid yet brave in her own small way, approached her mother with a drawing clutched tightly in her hand. It was a picture of their home, bathed in soft light and surrounded by protective symbols, an innocent plea for safety and warmth. Mrs. Robinson's eyes welled with a mix of sorrow and fierce determination as she hugged her daughter close. In that silent embrace, the unspoken promise was clear: they would stand together, no matter how treacherous the path ahead might be. As dawn crept over the horizon once again, the Robinsons prepared themselves for the inevitable confrontation with the forces that sought to bury the truth. The encrypted email, the ledger, and the scattered fragments of evidence had coalesced into a battle plan, a blueprint for resistance against a system that had exploited both animals and humans alike. With every piece of the puzzle laid bare, the family resolved to use their newfound knowledge to dismantle the network of corruption, piece by piece. Outside, the first light of day revealed a neighborhood that, despite its outward calm, was now a stage for a conflict of monumental proportions. Every door, every window, seemed to hold the promise of secrets waiting to be uncovered. And as the Robinsons stepped into that uncertain morning, they carried with them not only the weight of their own fears but also the fierce determination to expose the hidden machinations that had so cruelly upended their lives. In this quiet but relentless pursuit of justice, the Robinsons had transformed from victims of a sinister experiment into agents of change, a small but resolute force prepared to challenge the darkness with the illuminating power of truth. Their journey, now intertwined with the lives of others who dared to dream of a better future, was far from over. The stakes were higher than ever, and the road ahead promised to be fraught with danger, betrayal, and heart-wrenching sacrifices. Yet, in the face of overwhelming adversity, they clung to the belief that even the deepest shadows could not forever silence the light of determination and hope. The oppressive veil of secrecy began to crumble as a chilling night settled over the neighborhood, its darkness punctuated by intermittent flashes of lightning that revealed glimpses of a reality too monstrous to ignore. In the heavy silence that blanketed the streets, every step taken by the Robinsons seemed to echo with the weight of a destiny not entirely their own. The air was thick with foreboding, as if the very atmosphere conspired to expose the hidden sins that had plagued the shelter and invaded their lives. Within the confines of their home, the tension had reached a fever pitch. In the study, a cramped, dimly lit room that had become the nerve center of their clandestine operations, the family, joined by Daniel and Arthur, pored over the latest trove of evidence. The scattered documents, digital recordings, and the damning ledger now painted an even more vivid picture of collusion, a meticulously orchestrated network of power brokers and researchers whose ambition had soured into cruelty. Each new revelation was a jagged shard in the mosaic of their lives, a reminder that the innocuous facade of suburban normalcy had been meticulously crafted to hide an undercurrent of malevolence. Outside, the silence was intermittently shattered by the low rumble of distant engines and the occasional clatter of something, or someone, moving stealthily along the sidewalk. The once comforting hum of everyday life had given way to an ominous, almost palpable dread. Mrs. Robinson's eyes, usually soft with maternal warmth, now flickered with a hardened determination as she recounted the details of every anomalous event that had taken place since the attack. Her voice, though quiet, was imbued with an intensity that belied the chaos swirling around them. Lily, tucked away on a threadbare rug in the corner of the room, clutched a well-worn teddy bear and scribbled frantically in a notebook, her youthful sketches now a raw, unfiltered expression of the terror and confusion that had seeped into her dreams. Mr. Robinson, his brow furrowed with both exhaustion and steely resolve, led the charge into the darkest recesses of their investigation. His recent forays back into the shelter had unearthed evidence that hinted at a clandestine meeting scheduled to take place in a long-abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a location that had once served as a forgotten relic of industrial ambition. The meeting was rumored to involve several key figures from the network, individuals who had so far managed to elude the prying eyes of the authorities. This discovery was the final piece that could either shatter the conspiracy wide open or plunge the family into an even deeper abyss. As the night deepened, Daniel's voice cut through the murmur of whispered strategies. "We have to move quickly," he urged, his tone betraying the urgency of a man who knew that time was a luxury none of them could afford. This warehouse could be the nerve center of their operations. If we can get inside and document everything, we might have the evidence needed to force the issue in the public eye. Arthur, who had grown more taciturn with each passing day, nodded slowly. His face, lined with regret and the heavy burden of secrets, was a map of scars both seen and unseen. "I've been there before," he said, his voice gravelly as if he were dredging up memories best left buried. "The place is a labyrinth of empty halls and forgotten machinery. But if you're going in, you need to be prepared for anything. They don't take kindly to intrusions." The plan was set. Under cover of a moonless sky, the group would converge on the derelict warehouse, a stark, imposing structure that stood as a monument to a past era of relentless industrial progress and equally relentless human ambition. In that moment, the familiar warmth of the Robinson home gave way to a cold, metallic fear that clutched at the edges of every thought. They knew that once they crossed the threshold of that forsaken building, there would be no turning back. On the eve of the operation, an uneasy calm settled over the household. The family exchanged parting looks laden with unspoken promises, each member aware of the peril that lay ahead. Lily's small hand slipped into Mrs. Robinson's as she stood by the window, gazing out at a world that now seemed as alien as it was hostile. In that fragile exchange, the bond of familial love shone as a beacon against the encroaching darkness, a silent vow that no matter what horrors they might face, they would face them together. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette a jagged line against a storm-darkened sky. The group approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the soft, damp earth. Each step was a journey into the unknown, where every rustle of wind and every creak of ancient metal heightened their awareness of being watched. The building's entrance was partially obscured by overgrown ivy and the remnants of time, yet it beckoned with a foreboding allure. Inside, the atmosphere was suffused with a musty scent of decay and forgotten memories. The only sound was the echo of their movements, an unrelenting reminder of the isolation and vulnerability that defined the space. In the dim light provided by their flashlights, they advanced along narrow corridors lined with rusted machinery and discarded remnants of a bygone era. Shadows played tricks on their eyes, morphing into shapes that seemed to whisper of past transgressions and future retribution. As they reached the core of the building, the group discovered a makeshift command center. A large table was strewn with documents, digital equipment, and scattered photographs that connected faces to names, figures who had long evaded accountability. The evidence was both damning and meticulously organized, as if prepared for a briefing by those who orchestrated the entire operation. In that moment, Mr. Robinson's heart pounded in his ears as he carefully documented each detail with his camera, his hands trembling not solely from fear but from the weight of the truth he was about to unleash upon a world indifferent to suffering. In the midst of their investigation, a sudden, sharp sound shattered the oppressive silence, a door slamming shut somewhere in the depths of the warehouse. The group froze, every muscle tensing as they instinctively moved into the shadows. A hushed panic spread through their ranks, each person acutely aware that their intrusion had not gone unnoticed. Daniel signaled for silence, his eyes darting about the darkness in search of the source of the noise. The tension was so thick it felt like a living entity, suffocating in its intensity. A low, measured voice echoed from behind a row of stacked crates. "I wouldn't have expected to see you here," it said, each syllable dripping with a mixture of amusement and menace. Out of the shadows stepped a figure, cloaked in the anonymity of the night and armed with an unmistakable air of authority. The intruder's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculated resolve, a man who embodied the very essence of the network they were desperate to expose. His presence was a stark reminder that every step they had taken into the heart of the conspiracy had been anticipated. Without a word, Mr. Robinson stepped forward, his resolve hardening into a steely determination. "We're not here to cause trouble," he declared, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "We're here to bring the truth to light." His words hung in the air, a fragile challenge to the dark forces that had orchestrated this elaborate scheme. The intruder's smile was thin and dangerous. "Truth," he repeated softly, as if savoring the word. "Truth is a luxury in our world, a luxury that often comes at a very high price." His tone was both a threat and a promise, a clear indication that the battle for control of the narrative was far from over. For several heartbeats, the silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Then, in an unexpected turn, the intruder motioned with a subtle gesture that seemed to diffuse the immediate hostility. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement," he murmured, his eyes never leaving Mr. Robinson's. The offer, ambiguous and laced with an undercurrent of coercion, sent a ripple of uncertainty through the group. It was a moment where the line between victim and collaborator blurred, where the promise of safety was intertwined with the threat of silence. In that charged exchange, the warehouse became a crucible of conflicting ideals. On one side stood the Robinsons and their allies, ordinary people transformed into reluctant warriors by circumstance, armed with the fervor of a truth that demanded revelation. On the other side was the shadow of a system built on exploitation, its emissary a living testament to the perversion of power and the betrayal of trust. Every detail of the clandestine operation, the carefully catalogued evidence, the looming threat of retribution, and the stark reality of human cruelty was now laid bare. The encounter escalated as more figures emerged from the darkness, their silhouettes forming a semicircle around the table of secrets. The intruder's companions exuded an air of icy efficiency, their presence a silent warning that the network was vast and deeply entrenched. Mr. Robinson, his pulse racing in defiance, held his ground even as the situation teetered on the brink of violence. In his eyes burned the determination of a man who had seen too much to retreat, a father determined to protect his family and a citizen unwilling to bow to corruption. A tense standoff ensued, where words became both weapons and shields. In whispered negotiations that mingled with the soft hum of old machinery, an uneasy truce began to form, a fragile understanding that, for now, the collision of two worlds might be paused to allow the truth a fleeting chance at survival. The intruder's final words, spoken with deliberate clarity, echoed in the cavernous space. "Sometimes, the cost of exposing the truth is measured not in dollars, but in the very essence of what it means to be human." As the group reluctantly backed away, leaving the command center with the evidence they had risked so much to secure, the oppressive weight of the confrontation lingered like a specter. Outside, the first hints of pre-dawn light began to seep into the horizon, casting a ghostly pallor over the warehouse and the lives entangled within its walls. The return journey was silent and somber, a procession of souls burdened with the knowledge that the battle was far from over and that the forces arrayed against them would not relinquish their stranglehold without a fight. Back at the Robinson home, the atmosphere had shifted into one of exhausted vigilance. Each creak of the floorboards, each murmur of the wind outside, was a reminder of the night's perilous encounter. Yet within that heavy silence, there also burned a fierce determination, a collective understanding that the evidence they now possessed was both a weapon and a beacon of hope. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a clarion call that even in the darkest of nights, the drive for truth could ignite the spark of revolution. In the quiet aftermath, as the family huddled together in the dim light of their living room, the stakes of their quest took on a new clarity. The labyrinthine network they had uncovered was more dangerous than ever, its tendrils reaching into the highest echelons of power and corruption. And yet, with every fragment of evidence and every moment of courage, they had inched closer to a reckoning, a moment when the full weight of the truth would come crashing down upon those who had manipulated lives for their own gain. In those final hours before the break of day, the Robinsons prepared for the inevitable next steps. Their resolve was as unyielding as the steel of the abandoned warehouse, and their hearts beat with the quiet intensity of warriors poised on the edge of a long-awaited confrontation. With the weight of their discoveries pressing upon them, they silently vowed that no matter the cost, they would stand against the tide of darkness. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon, a culmination of every secret, every betrayal, and every painful lesson learned in the crucible of their struggle. In that penultimate moment, when the promise of dawn was nearly upon them and the chilling remnants of the night still clung to the edges of their reality, the Robinson family, united in purpose and fortified by the truth, readied themselves for the battle that would determine not only their fate but the fate of countless others caught in the merciless grip of an insidious conspiracy. As the pale light of early morning crept over the horizon, the air in the Robinson household was charged with a palpable mix of anticipation and dread. In the quiet before the storm of revelations, every member of the family, alongside Arthur, Daniel, and their newfound allies, felt the weight of countless hidden truths pressing down upon them. The encrypted files, the ledger, and every scrap of evidence painstakingly gathered had led them to this singular moment, the final confrontation with a network that had operated in the shadows for far too long. In a secure makeshift room, hastily arranged in the basement of a community center, the group huddled around a battered wooden table. The space, illuminated only by the flickering light of a single lamp and the steady hum of a portable generator, became the stage upon which their resolve was about to be tested. Mr. Robinson's eyes, etched with determination and the scars of sleepless nights, met those of his wife and young Lily, who now looked on with a cautious blend of innocence and understanding that belied her tender years. In that moment, their personal quest had become a battle for justice on a scale that reached far beyond their once peaceful neighborhood. Daniel, with his recorder resting on the table and his hands still shaking from the adrenaline of recent encounters, recounted the final details of their plan. They would release every piece of evidence to the press, compelling the local authorities and, eventually, national media to take action. It was a move that carried tremendous risk, a calculated act of defiance against a network that wielded influence like a weapon. Yet, the message was clear: the truth, once uncovered, could no longer be silenced. Outside the safe room, on a rain-washed street lit by the muted glow of emergency lights, a convoy of sympathetic vehicles gathered. Former colleagues, local activists, and even a few courageous insiders had aligned themselves with the Robinsons' cause. They formed a human barrier, a physical manifestation of the community's growing demand for accountability. The atmosphere was electric, a tense calm before a decisive clash between the forces of corruption and those who yearned for transparency. Inside the community center, Mr. Robinson opened his laptop and began sending out the final encrypted package to every major news outlet he could reach. His fingers moved swiftly over the keys, each tap a defiant punctuation mark against years of silent oppression. Across the table, Arthur's voice was quiet yet firm as he recounted the darkest moments of his time at the shelter, a tale of cruelty and manipulation that no one should have to endure. His testimony, once hidden in the dust of forgotten rooms, now carried the weight of undeniable truth. The decisive moment came when Daniel's phone buzzed with a response. A high-ranking journalist from a national news network had confirmed the story would air within hours. That confirmation was like a spark in a tinder-dry forest. The encrypted files were released simultaneously across social media platforms, local websites, and, within minutes, the story was all over the news. Headlines screamed of unethical experiments, secret meetings, and a network of power brokers whose reach had been exposed by the courage of one family unwilling to back down. For a heartbeat, there was silence, a pause where the enormity of what had been unleashed seemed to suspend time itself. Then, like ripples on a still pond, phone calls, messages, and emergency meetings began to echo through the corridors of power. The network, so meticulously hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and anonymity, suddenly found itself under the relentless glare of public scrutiny. Authorities, once complicit through inaction, scrambled to respond. Investigations were launched, and the once invisible hand of corruption started to falter under the weight of undeniable evidence. In the midst of this unfolding chaos, the Robinson family found a moment of fragile solace. Standing together on the doorstep of their home, they looked out at the quiet street that had witnessed both their deepest fears and their highest hopes. Lily, still clutching her favorite stuffed animal, gazed upward as if trying to comprehend the gravity of the moment. Mrs. Robinson reached out and took her daughter's hand, a silent vow passing between them, that no matter how long or arduous the battle, they would always stand together. Across town, in offices now abuzz with the frantic activity of investigators and journalists, a dramatic transformation was taking shape. The narrative was shifting from one of quiet suburban routine to a powerful call for systemic reform. Every piece of evidence, the ledger, the testimonies, the digital records, formed a mosaic of truths that could no longer be ignored. As press conferences were scheduled and inquiries were launched, those who had once operated in the shadows began to see their carefully constructed walls crumble. Yet even as justice started to tip the scales, there was a lingering sense of solemnity. The final confrontation was not a grand, cinematic battle, it was the quiet, determined work of ordinary people compelled by the need for truth. In that subtle, unassuming manner lay the real power, the power of resilience, of unity, and of the steadfast refusal to allow cruelty to remain unchallenged. In the days that followed, as the media spotlight burned brightly on the scandal, community meetings replaced hushed whispers on street corners. Neighbors who had once passed each other with wary glances now gathered to discuss how to rebuild trust and ensure that transparency would be the new norm. The local authorities, forced by public pressure to act, began to dismantle the covert operations piece by piece, and many of the conspirators found themselves under the harsh light of legal accountability. For the Robinsons, the ordeal left an indelible mark, a reminder that even the most ordinary lives can become the battleground for extraordinary truths. Their journey, marked by fear and uncertainty, had evolved into a powerful narrative of hope and redemption. While scars remained, both seen and unseen, they also carried with them a new sense of purpose. The darkness they had endured would serve as a constant reminder to remain vigilant, to question the facades of normalcy, and to hold tightly to the belief that even in the depths of despair, the light of truth could prevail. In that final, resonant moment of a long and painful journey, the Robinsons and their allies stood united as living proof that courage is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to confront it head-on. The battle had not erased their pain, nor would it mend every broken piece of their past, but it had ignited a beacon of hope, a promise that, when ordinary people come together to unmask hidden evils, the world can be transformed, one truth at a time.